everybody. I would just like to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Chugh is the medical director of the Toronto Concussion Clinic, where a multidisciplinary team works collaboratively to rehabilitate patients from persistent concussion symptoms. He draws on years of training and experience in the field of managing headache, fatigue, sleep disturbances, dizziness, binocular vision, psychological disturbances, cognitive consequences, autonomic dysfunction, and musculoskeletal injuries. The clinic sees patients 7 years old and older from all over Ontario and offers a significant number of OHIP-funded services and virtual services. Okay, so now I'll hand you over to Dr. Chugh. Thanks, Dr. Chugh.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Chugh. I'm a medical director at the Toronto Concussion Clinic. And basically, we just manage people's persistent concussion symptoms. That's what it's called now. They don't really call it post-concussion syndrome anymore, although we still call it because we still call it that because patients call it that. But and so this is a topic I can talk about for hours and hours. And so usually, I kind of know a little bit about the people I'm presenting the talk for. And so today I'm not really sure who's here. So I just want to get an idea from all of you. So I see there's Darlene, Rick, and Renee. I wanted to get an idea from you guys, what you're hoping to get out of today's session so I can really tailor it to you guys.
Yeah, feel free to turn your mic on, or you can put it in the chat, whatever you prefer. Maybe you have had a concussion, or you know somebody with a concussion, or maybe you're another medical provider. You could just give us like 1 or 2 words. That would be helpful.
Yeah, well, I guess, I know 7 o'clock in the evening, this time is precious for you guys, right? So what would make this next hour, is it an hour we have, Sequoia?
Yes, roughly an hour, yeah.
So what would make this next hour a good use of your time? What would make you say, okay, yeah, go ahead.
It's Darlene.
Hey, Darlene.
I'm curious whether migraine headaches could be a possible reaction to a concussion, maybe years earlier, not knowing.
Years early? What do you mean by years earlier?
Maybe 20, 30 years, even when you were a child and you didn't even know that you were concussed at the time, obviously.
Oh.
But if you have recurring headaches, especially barometric pressure headaches,
yeah,
just curious.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. We'll talk about that. I'll give you my 2 cents on that. Barometric pressure headaches.
And we have one comment in the chat. Renee, he wants to know, expand his knowledge. I have a friend who's had a few concussions.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought that was Darlene, right? And Renee, okay. Get a friend. And in which capacity do you want to know a little bit more, Renee? Like, you want to know more how you can support this person as a caregiver, or do you want to understand better what they're going through? It's only an hour, so I really want to kind of give you the juice you guys are looking for.
Hi, doctor. I just want to learn. I'm not a caregiver or anything, just as a friend to know what the signs and symptoms are and how you can support this individual, what you can do for that individual.
Okay.
As a friend.
As a friend. And like, how close a friend are you? Like, do you live with this person?
No, it's just my next door neighbor, and
Okay.
She's had several falls and she's prone to concussions. She's had a concussion. I didn't know her back then, but so I would just like to understand it a bit more.
Okay, gotcha. That's, you know what, that question you asked is a very broad and big question. So I'm gonna try to tackle it, and you please interrupt me whenever you have a question, because I want to make sure that I'm not going off on a tangent and I'm actually addressing what you guys want. These are already really good questions. Anyone else before I get going? All right.
It's Darlene again.
Hey,
Just
Charlie.
another thought.
Yeah.
Dementia,
Yes.
again, years earlier,
Yeah.
and dementia appearing years later.
Yeah. 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 Well, okay. I'll talk about that. I wasn't planning on it, but I will. That's one that a lot of our patients are very worried about, frankly. Okay. All right. Anyone else? And if something pops up, feel free to interrupt me, just like Darlene. That's really good. I actually like that because I'm the kind of guy that'll keep talking and talking, and I don't leave time at the end for many questions. So please interrupt me. All right. I'm just gonna forget about the other computer. I like to do this somewhere else, but I'm just gonna use this backup computer. So excuse like my furnace and all that in the back. Okay. Shut that down. How should I start this off? Okay, I'm gonna share a screen with you guys, and I'm gonna start it off like this. I think, yeah, I know how we're gonna try to approach this. See, I was preparing for this, but really, without knowing what you guys wanted, it'd be hard to really customize it for you. So I'm gonna pull this up one sec. Yes, share screen. There we go. Share. All right. I'm gonna skip all this. So I'm gonna start off with Renee was talking about her neighbor, right? So for a lot of people with concussion, a lot of times, or persistent concussion symptoms, a lot of times they look kind of normal to all of us. Like they say good morning and all that kind of stuff. You don't really see them. They don't really see them limping, or sometimes you do see them like dizzy and holding on to things and stuff. But a lot of times you can't tell by looking at them. And it's kind of like if I were to look around this room and say there's no infrared light, right? You'd say like, how do you know that? Well, I don't see it. And you'd be like, well, you need an infrared, device to see it, right? So when we're dealing with concussion and persistent concussion symptoms, there is actually something going on, but you have to be sensitive to be able to see it clinically. So like maybe a trained professional or someone who deals with injured people a lot. Or you just have to appreciate that there is stuff going on in the brain. So in this case, I just showing you a slide. I'm not going to go through all the details, but there's a lot of metabolic changes that allow us to do what we do, allow a neuron to fire. And a neuron is just a cell in the brain, right? And everything we do has its origins in a firing of a certain network of brain cells. So if those cells are not working properly, then whatever you want to do is not going to work properly. And depending on which regions of the brain have been affected and so on, you're going to like see people struggle in different ways. So some people, when they have a concussion, afterwards, they have a lot of headaches. Some people, when they have a concussion, they have a lot of dizziness. Sometimes they have a lot of cognitive issues. Some people have all of them. Some people have just some things, right? So that's one part of it. Another part of it is that, if you guys have had a flu before, so you probably remember after you had a flu, it took you a while, like maybe a few days, maybe a week to kind of get back in the swing of things, right? Like you probably remember that you were sleeping a lot when you had the flu, and then all of a sudden you couldn't sleep for like a few days, and then you just had to kind of get up and get out of bed to go to work and come back and just deal with the sleepiness, and slowly your schedule start to regulate, and then 1 to 3 weeks later you feel like you're back to normal, right? So part of this injury, or like what people experience, is not just this, but it's how they react to their injury. So for instance, a caregiver for someone with a concussion has a very influential job. Now, I don't want to put a lot of responsibility on them because it's not that intuitive and it's not that easy. However, if they were to make it into like a project of theirs, they could have a great influence on that patient's outcome. Let me give you an example. I'll give you an example with respect to headaches, since Darlene brought up headaches. And I'll get into your question, Darlene, but I'm just gonna go this way for now. So say someone, for example, and by the way, if you look at the numbers, so when people have a concussion, do you guys think that the headache gets better with time in everyone? Any ideas? That would make sense, right? Like if you hurt your ankle, sprain your ankle, it usually just keeps getting better with time, right? However, in a lot of issues post-concussion, a lot of people get worse with time. A lot of people, their headaches are worse. So about a quarter of people, their headaches are worse a year out than they were right after the injury. You take sleep issues. So people who have sleep problems post-concussion, it has about a 25% higher incidence a year out. So the farther away you are from the concussion, the worse your sleep issues are, right? So there is this thing going on in the brain, but there's also other things that are going on. And a lot of it is how we react to things. So you take, for example, someone who has a chronic headache. See, when it's a chronic issue like this, we have to think about it differently. If it's like a once in a while thing, say like you get a headache and you're not going to get another one for 2-3 months. You just know that, right? You could pretty much do anything and get away with it. Like you could take Advil, you could have a shot of vodka, although it's not recommended, right? You'd probably get away with it. You probably wouldn't get another headache for a few months, and you might even go out and say, you know what you should do? When I had a headache, I just had a shot of vodka and I felt great after. And then that's how these things come out there, right? But when it's a chronic problem where you get like, say, chronic headache, it's 15 days a month or more, right? When you start having a chronic problem, you got to think about it differently. So you almost got to think about the headache as a separate person. So like you're in a relationship with this headache. So if you have a headache, now obviously if it's like a rip-roaring, like say a red light headache, we call a red light headache like you just got to stop, right? Just like in the traffic light. Where there's the yellow headaches where you can keep going a bit, you already got going, just take it easy. And then there's the green, okay, you got a headache, but you can keep going, right? So some people, when they're just so annoyed with having headaches all the time, then they just give it a lot too much respect, if you know what I mean. They just give it, I'll give you an example. This is like, there's this Netflix special called, I think it's called The Last Dance. It's like about the Chicago Bulls last season. And they talk about, so the last season, like I think they lost like 6 games, right? That's incredible. And they said that they knew if they won at the coin toss, they already knew, because if the opponent gave too much respect to Michael Jordan, they knew they won. So like that, if we're like kind of respecting the headache too much and giving it too much sway over our lifestyle, it can kind of take over. And I'm going to talk a bit about what I mean by that. So ordinarily when people get a headache, they're like, I need help, right? So we help them, we mean well, and they want help, and it's reasonable to think of it that way. However, when it's a chronic problem, if the headache is a separate person, if you think of it like that, wouldn't that just be more inviting of the headache? It would kind of make it more comfortable for the headache to live there, if you know what I mean. It'd be the silver lining, if you know, although no one would really want it, but as long as I got it, at least I don't have to do this, right? This is just one aspect. I want to like make you think like this is like a whole generalization of headaches, but I want to give you one example of how headaches is also how we react to headaches that makes it worse. We actually, in effect, train headaches, even if we don't intend to. So you take, for example, when someone, say, has a green light headache or a yellow light headache, right? They can keep going, but they stop. They choose to stop. And if they're family members, as well-intentioned as they are, say, yeah, lie down, honey. I'm going to look after that for you. Next time you get a headache, call me. I'll come back from the office and I'll take over for you. That kind of is going to see the headache kind of stay there. Well, it's going to, not necessarily that's the only factor, but it's going to kind of support the headache in a sense. We call it reinforce it, right? So a way to break that down would be like, you know what? Okay, if you got a green light headache or a yellow light headache, let's develop the awareness that it's not like a red light headache. And then let's make a plan ahead of time. Like if the headache is going to run that play, the green light play, this is what you're going to do in response to that. And you make a contingency management plan. And then when people don't have headaches, that's the time, really, when you think about it, which is a chronic situation now, that's the time when you really want to go and spend time with that person. Celebrate that time. Want to make that time, that version of that person, more inviting so that they will stay there. They'll see it again, if you know what I mean. So when it's a chronic problem, we tend to look at things differently, you know. So that's an important point. Why did I get on that? The caregiver bit. Oh yes, and I want to talk about signs and symptoms. So signs and symptoms can be as a result of this, and they can be a result of our reaction or other people's reaction to us, and so on. And the reaction doesn't have to be like an intentional thing. It could also be insurance companies who are not really being cooperative with supporting us for whatever reason. I don't want to blame them, right? But perhaps it's not going your way, and so you have to go back to work because they deem you having a mild injury. And so you just don't know how you're going to do it because you're struggling even to do simple things. That's very stressful, right? And it just increases how taxing the situation is for people. So when you have these impairments, when you're doing your day-to-day stuff, say you're doing like work or computer work and so on, you're not like the same version of yourself you want to be, right? So in a sense, you have to try a lot harder to get the same task done. So this is one of the reasons why plugging through your activities, like continuing to go to work, is extra stressful because you don't have the same resources to deal with it as you did before. The other thing is, a very common thing that these networks code for is our ability to withstand stress. So that's something that's often underappreciated. The ability for someone to say something or for us to be able to handle with something not going correct is an actual skill. And our fight or flight response does actually kind of react to that. In our modern day society, it reacts really often to something like that. Like you get an email, oh my gosh, I'm running late for the Zoom call. My technology's not working. These daily hassles actually do cost us something in terms of our stress response. And from an evolutionary perspective, we're better suited to be hunters and gatherers and deal with like major things like running from a bear actually than daily hassles. So but we are in this society where we have all these daily hassles, and our fight or flight system is constantly getting triggered. In the post-concussion brain, generally, people do not handle that very well. And so they can wake up pretty okay, some people, and they can do things, but once one little hiccup comes in their way, and I don't want to say little to make it sound like I'm kind of demeaning them or putting them down, but it could be like, relative to what they could handle before, it could seem little to them. It could derail everything and they could just have a meltdown. There was someone else helping today with something and he was doing pretty good because we worked on it and we've been training him to do this thing cognitively to get around this impairment he was having. And then once there was this hiccup, and you know what it was? It was a Mac computer, and the file he wanted to drag into a folder, he wasn't able to drag it. And I don't know Max, right? So I didn't know how to help him. And he just got so frustrated. He just melted down. And people would look at that and say, that's a psychiatric issue. He needs psychiatric help. I wouldn't say that. I would say that it's very frustrating. Imagine you couldn't do a shadow of what you could do before. it can be very frustrating, and you just that your ability to kind of relate to that situation in a way that's useful, that's an actual skill that you've lost as a result of this. Can you? I have a 1-year-old right now, and like sometimes I feel she's frustrated because she can't talk. She wants to talk, but she gets frustrated. Imagine having all these things in our head right now, but all of a sudden we can't speak or talk about it. Imagine how frustrating that could be, right? So I think compassion, understanding that, you'll never really understand what they're going through. And also the resources they have to deal with it have been affected. The person I'm talking about was a director at a city level for a very big branch of the government. And, so you can imagine how many things he tended to manage. And a simple thing like that saw him kind of go off, right? So you can see how this illness or this injury can really spiral out of control. It can like a tumbled web of, of different factors and reactions and so on. And then you end up training the brain to, so for instance, in his case, the more often you lose your temper about something like that and then just kind of like quit and stop doing something, in a sense, you're training that response, right? And that response is a response that tends to see us staying in injury and staying in disability. And so we have to kind of check that cycle and be like, yes, we understand why you're doing that. It makes perfect sense. When someone has a headache, they don't want to have to be doing this. They want to be able to rest. But because it's a chronic issue and it's not going away, we're going to have to think about it differently. We're going to have to think about it as a third person, and we want to kind of root it out. And in a sense, we want to not root it out. We want to kind of live our lives on our own terms that sees it kind of fall by the wayside. I think that's a better way to word it. Anyway, so when I'm going to show you another slide now. So that's the neuron. And let me show you another slide. Is it here? Oh, here. So here's a slide. So I showed you a picture of one neuron. Now, if you take the brain, there's a bunch of neurons there. And in this image I'm showing you, this is an image, a functional MRI image. So it's showing metabolism in people's brains. In the first column, it's people with a concussion. In the second column, it's people without a concussion. And in the first row, they have a task there called Z54. In the second row, another cognitive task. In the study, they refer to it as Z45 and so on, right? Look how much harder the concussed brain has to work to get the same job done as the non-concussed brain. See how much more of that brain is lighting up. It's kind of like if you were to get into like an airplane, right? And it's kind of like making a lot of noise and like kind of shaking a lot. It doesn't inspire much confidence. When you see that, people think when the brain's you can't do what you want to do, the brain's actually depressed. That's what patients often think. Like it's not firing. It's the opposite. It's actually firing too much. It's not organized. So like you take someone like me who's, a sport that I've done a couple times, but not really good at is golf. And I'm really clumsy and I can't hit the ball very far, whereas 9-year-olds are very smooth and they can. Same kind of thing. I'm just too active. I'm using too many of the wrong muscles to get it done, right? So this is what's happening there. Now, if you're 40 years old, imagine that you've been training your brain to do these tasks for 40 years. In one instant, those circuits have been disrupted and you no longer can do it the exact same way. So you start finding other ways to do it, right? So, and that's a big part of the symptoms that people experience because they end up compensating for their injury. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an analogy and an example. So an analogy would be, say you're on ice, right? So I can't skate. So when I'm on ice, I'm going to kind of spread my legs a little bit farther apart and kind of waddle, right? Now, if I were to come off the ice and keep walking like that, I'm probably going to trip on things and fall and hurt myself, right? Like that, a lot of times there's a lot of things that we take for granted, like me sitting here at this computer screen talking to you right now. There are many skills that I'm using that most of us are not even aware we have until we lose it, right? So when you say you lose the ability to kind of I'll be specific. When I'm looking at the screen, my ability to kind of use my eyes in a way that's useful depends a lot on my ability to appreciate my peripheral vision. So if I'm not weighing that heavily enough in my mind, my central vision can kind of take over in terms of how much of the brain it's commanding and using. Okay. The problem with that is it's a gas guzzler. It uses a lot of energy, and it's not the ideal way to do it. It's not the way you've been trained to do it. You've been training to do it the last 40 years. So now the more type A someone is, for example, in this context, in this instance, the more they're like, you know what, I don't care. I'm just going to get it done. I'm going to put my head down and plug through it. The more they're training themselves to do it the wrong way, not the way they did it the first time. So for a lot of our patients, getting them to relax is really important. Relax is not a common thing. Actually, there's a physician in Canada. He's also a best-selling author, Dr. Gabor Mate, talks a lot about this. Talks about a lot about stress and personality types and our everyday society and how it's kind of breeding people to kind of relate to things in a way that could actually backfire. So in this context, it's really hard take for instance, lawyers. It's really hard for us to get patients who are lawyers to relax because a lot of times that kind of pushing through things is what makes them really good at their job. But when it comes to rehabilitation, that actually backfires and works against them because now they're not open to doing it a different way, a way that they might have learned when they were 2 or 3 years old. So if I were to summarize this rehabilitation really simply with an image, the whole goal of post-concussion recovery is to move you guys or patients from the first column to the second column. Basically it. Now, that sounds simple, but how do you do that? In medicine, most people think of things like, I got a headache, doctor, give me something. Great, it worked. The doctor got rid of my headache, right? You know, for the most part, when it comes to headaches, for the most part, if it's a chronic situation, medication doesn't work that great, especially acute medication. Even the prophylactic ones, the ones that you take every day, just to kind of keep it at bay or reduce the likelihood of it triggering, you know, at best, it has a 50% rate of working, and like the majority of those people stop using it after 10 months or a year because of side effects or because of just it stops working, right? So what I'm introducing here is not really like earth-shattering or completely different than what's out there right now. What I'm saying is, and I'm a medical doctor, obviously, and I'm not anti-medicine at all. Like medicine has saved one of a very dear family members of mine's life. So I'm not against that. But what I am saying is that oftentimes the perspective patients have when it comes to their medical issues is that they need a doctor to kind of give them something to cure it. This injury is an example where that doesn't work. And actually studies have shown that. For instance, post-traumatic headache. They have shown that they have not been able to show that medication have been helpful in managing that. So it's not right now in the guidelines for managing post-traumatic headache. So so basically there's nothing I can give to get rid of all that orange, to kind of put out all that fire, if you know what I mean. So what do? Well, if you took a kid to tennis lessons and you'd ask the coach, like, coach, please give him something so he can stop being a bad tennis player. The coach would kind of laugh because they'd be like, what you're trying to say is you want me to train him to be a good, or her or him, whatever, them, to be a good tennis player, right? And you'd be like, yeah, that's what I want. So that's the same model that works for this type of, and actually not just this recovery, many different conditions. Headache is another common one. Sleep is another common one. Headache is the second leading cause of disability in the world, especially migraine headache, right? Yet, most of us think of medication when it comes to managing it, but one of the best ways to manage it is to train the patient. So we want to train your brain to do things in a way that sees all that excess activity fall by the wayside. We want to basically improve your golf swing, if you know what I mean. You know, you want to improve the way you do. So we have to train people to do the things they want to do again. Or maybe not even again, just new things, right? So it's an active process, and that can be tiring for a lot of people. A lot of people, so I'm talking again about I think it was Renee that was talking about like their neighbor. A lot of people have lost hope. And when you lose hope, it's really hard to get motivated to start training towards something. And so they could live in disability for a long time. And sometimes insurance companies make them believe that that's their fault. They don't say that. They wouldn't say that. But I mean, like sometimes that's the message patients get because they're like, we don't see any reason why you can't go back to work and this kind of thing. And so on. So that's a real thing too. So when you're talking about your neighbor, I think now you're getting an idea that one, they had or continue to have some impairment in the way the nerves are firing. For the most part, depending on how many concussions they've had, for many people, the ability for the nerves to kind of regain the ability to run current through them comes back. Okay. However, just because you can do that doesn't mean you're going to use the networks the same way unless you train it to do that. Some of these things you trained way back in the day when you were like 2, 3. You don't even realize an actual thing that you're doing. So, and it came naturally because that's the way the humans develop. It just, like my 1-year-old, she falls, it doesn't really hurt. Whereas when I fall, it's like, oh, I have to ice things for like a few days, right? So, it can be a bit harder to train it as an adult. And if they lose hope or curiosity, then it gets even harder. And if they have a lot of stress going on in their lives right now, it gets even harder. Stress is a huge thing. I already mentioned why, but also you look at even take children, for example. And I use children as an example because their brains are rapidly developing and they're developing so many synapses in their brain, like the ability to do things. Like one day, like my 1-year-old, she couldn't walk 3 weeks ago, and now she's walking everywhere, right? So the ability their ability to learn is amazing. And you take children who come from homes with chronic stress, the chronic stress will even affect their growth. Can you believe that? Even if they have the same nutrition and everything. So stress is very toxic to the brain and in your ability to do things and manage things really well. So that's another. And all of these things come together and we call it post-concussion syndrome. So it's actually quite complex. And if you're just thinking about, okay, give me something to get rid of this problem with the brain, you're missing a whole lot of opportunities to help this patient. And it might not even be effective because there could be other mechanisms at play in their persistent concussion symptoms. I just spoke for half an hour. So I just want to take a break for a sec. I'm going to get into some of the things Darlene asked about because I think those are really good. Renee, I wanted to, because your question was really a big question, and I wanted to give you a little information about the culture and the way your neighbor may be why she might be going through what she's going and how vast the problem could be. And so when it comes to signs and symptoms, the signs and symptoms could be basically anything. It could be simply I can't find my words anymore, or I can't keep these numbers in my head for longer. I look at the recipe book and then I come back and I forget what I just read. Or it can be inability to keep their cool, or their social graces, or it could be their ability to sleep, or it could be so many different things. The most common things that happen post-concussion are fatigue, headache, dizziness. Those 3 are the most common, but a lot of people, 70% of people, have visual issues. Most of the time we go to the optometrist says, you got 20/20 vision, or I can get you to 20/20 vision. And we're like, great. And your eyes look healthy. Great. That's all I need to know, right? For the most part, that's true. For most people, that's all they need to know. because we can safely assume that they can do everything else really well. For like 95% or 90% of the population, we can make that assumption. So we get away with it. But in post-concussion syndrome, we can't. So oftentimes the assessments are much more involved, looking for things that for everyone else, we assume is normal, right? So it could be inability to kind of see things the way they could. They could avoid reading because now it hurts, or there's double vision. I already mentioned sleep, right? Cognitive issues, autonomic issues. So just like, for instance, if they want to increase their activity level, like running or doing something physical, they can start getting dizzy and get really lightheaded or lose all their energy really quickly, even just changing positions. Almost anything that's coded for in the brain, which is everything, even the way you fire your muscles and walk can change, you know? I even have some opinions. I don't know, it's not evidence-based, I'm not going to say it, but I have some opinions that even like there's correlations between other types of illnesses and this injury. And that's my opinion, but anyway, so the signs and symptoms can be very, very broad. So I think the main thing is really to support the person, and supporting them doesn't always mean pleasing them, right? Like sometimes we have a kid who can be a bit spoiled, and just making the kid happy is not the name of the game. Sometimes you gotta be a little clever to kind of get the version of them that you want to see, or help them be the best version of themselves, So supporting them is not always straightforward, and usually education for both, for the caregiver or people who are involved, and the patient is really important because they start to think about things differently. Before I go on to, I mentioned some things about Darlene's things, but I want to mention a little bit more about that. So Renee, is there anything more that you wanted to know, or does that bring up any more questions for you with respect to what you asked me at the beginning?
No, the information you gave me has been great. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, if you think of anything else, let me know. So I'm going to go into headaches for a sec. I think this is a great opportunity to kind of show you how some of the brain networks work. So give me a sec. I'm just going to pull up a slide. I think it's a different presentation. One sec. Oh, there we go.
I just want to say something. Years ago, my mother had a fall in the house. I was there and went to the hospital, whatever. But anyway, this is a long time ago. So the thing I knew about concussions back then was I check in on her during when she was sleeping, and I'd always say, "Are you okay? Are you up?" And she would respond. So I thought, okay, she doesn't have a concussion. And I just left it at that.
Yeah, so neuroscience has like exploded in information in the last 25 years. So there's a lot of things we know now that we didn't know before. And so there wasn't a lot of understanding about what concussions were and how to manage them and how to treat them. And so a lot of people just kind of lived with them and so on. Secondly, in the emergency department, they're usually focused on like saving lives. So usually there's nothing for them to do for these patients other than hopefully connect them with resources that can help them, right? But other than that, like there's really no life-saving intervention for concussions for the most part. If it's a more severe brain injury, then yes. But so there's you don't really get much information there. And I don't even know if it's like would be appropriate, because then they're going to spend a lot of time counseling people on concussions when there's people coming in crashing with like other type of issues that need interventions quickly to save their lives and so on. But yeah, that's really common, unfortunately, which kind of leads us what Darlene was asking. She was asking, what happens if you had a concussion way back and you didn't really realize it, and now you have all these issues that maybe it came from concussion, right? Frankly, you'll never really know for the most part. I can think of one person. He came to our program. This person had a a brain injury like 30 years ago. I don't want to say too much, just in case someone knows this person, but 30 years ago. They did not have a brain injury recently, but all of a sudden, all these new things start happening in their lives, like kids and this and that. And all of a sudden, they start having all these post-concussion syndrome symptoms. And this person's relative was in our program. And so she recommended, she's like, why don't you talk to them? Because you have the same symptoms I have. And the person was like, oh, I never hit my head. And it was 30 years ago. So she's like, whatever, go ahead and do it, right? So he met with us, and sure enough, like a lot of his symptoms were post-concussion symptoms. And so this person stayed in our program for like 8 months, and we were helping him train everything to like the way he would like to. And in the process, he won a lot of our admiration because he had a lot of impairments. And I think based on the assessments we did, most of us were of the opinion that he had these impairments his whole life. And to be able to achieve the things he achieved despite having these impairments is remarkable. Like, who doesn't love these type of redemption stories, right? Like, you know, the movie Rudy, or, you know, the story The Little Engine That Could. I don't know if kids read that anymore, but, you know, who doesn't like these type of stories? This person, it was remarkable that they were able to do everything they did, and you could see that come through. They could really leverage their strengths, and they applied it to their rehabilitation. And we were able to train things that if they trained it 30 years ago, I wonder how much easier school would have been, life would have been. They might have even gone in a different direction, in a different field, because, you know, we tend to gravitate to things that we do well, or things that are comfortable or pleasant, and so on. So, so it's very possible that a lot of like people's health conditions today may relate to previous head trauma, and you'll never really know. And frankly, from a rehabilitation perspective, we're not that focused on that. We're more focused on what's the next step that we can take that sees you one step closer to what you want to see. So for instance, it's really, there's a lot of psychology when it comes to the rehabilitation of post-concussion syndrome. So oftentimes patients will come in and say, when you ask them, what do you want? They're like, I want to get rid of my headache. That sounds really reasonable, right? However, because of the way headache works, having that amount of focus on the headache actually can backfire. And so when you ask them, okay, well, if the headache were to kind of get to that level where you were content or happy with it, what difference would that make to your life? People are kind of stumped. They're like, what do you mean? I don't understand the question. You're like, well, if you didn't have this headache, how would someone close to you notice? What would be different about you? And so really what they're asking, again, it's not like, here, this is my kid, teach him to not be a bad tennis player. What they're actually asking is train him to enjoy this game and be a good tennis player. So in the sense, train me to live my life in a way where I can hurdle past these headaches. And eventually these headaches fall by the wayside. They're not an issue. When it's a once in a while headache, no one really cares about getting that psychological about it and rigorous about it, because it's just going to go away and it won't come back until it comes back again, which will hopefully be a long time from now. But when it's a chronic thing, kind of inverting things and looking at things differently become really important. So, what do I want to show you when it comes to headache? There's a lot to talk about. Okay, so one thing is, headache actually, when you ask people like what your headache's like, they spend a lot of time trying to describe it to you, right? And then if you look at our medical system, there's like a checklist. If you satisfy the boxes on that checklist, then you qualify for this diagnosis. And then the thinking is that if you can lump all these people together, like migraine people, then, you know, to migraine people, you give migraine medicine. And then chances are like 50% it'll make them better, right? That's the whole goal. Unfortunately for post-traumatic headache, there's such a mixed, like Canadians, we're so many different colors and sizes and races and languages and so on. There's so many different looks to a post-traumatic headache that it's really kind of, we don't really know why we're lumping them together, other than we just don't know what to do with them. So we just lump them all together. We call them post-traumatic headache. Okay. Now, yes, like about a half of those people, they look more like migraines, but they don't respond to migraine medication the same way migraine people respond, for the most part. Some of them do. Remember, when we're talking, when we give you these percentages, we're saying on average, right? There's always going to be outliers and some people who respond to medication and so on. Some people don't respond at all. And this is why often doctors will still give it a shot. You have this headache. It came on after your trauma, so it's technically post-traumatic headache, but it does look a lot like a migraine. Let's treat it like a migraine and see what happens, right? With our patients, mostly we notice medication doesn't seem to help them for the most part. Prophylactic medication. So at any rate, whether they got whatever they got this headache, and we don't call it migraine, we'll call it post-traumatic headache, whether they got this headache as a result of the injury or a result of reactions to the injury. Because remember, I told you how it all gets mixed together, right? Stress response, which is the biggest trigger for headaches or exacerbator of headaches, right? Is stress and negative emotions for most people. So if all that all gets mixed together, you end up getting like, because remember, this injury doesn't just affect the brain, it affects who you are, the roles you fulfill, whether you can work, your financial means, everything, right? So all of that has a reaction. So when we're trying to like apportion a certain amount of blame for this headache on the injury, it almost is like it's kind of pointless. Like, why even bother? What do we want? What's that going to help us do? And people are like, I don't know what's going to help me do. Okay, so then what do you want? And they'll be like, I want to be able to do this. Let's train that. And so there's a way you can train people to live their lives in a way that kind of does not reinforce the headache. There's an article on our website that talks about that. It's if you go to our website, torontoconcussion.ca, and you type in headache, behavioral therapy, that article will give you a rough idea of how you kind of can tackle headaches with behavioral and lifestyle interventions. And those are not sloppy second interventions. Those are grade A interventions. In many cases, they're actually even more effective in different contexts than medication, especially in post-concussion people. And also in pediatric populations, they actually found those behavioral and lifestyle interventions are more successful than medication in people 18 and under. So this is not, it's just we don't talk about it much because there's so much, it requires a lot of time in the doctor's office. And also a lot of patients don't want to do that, especially if they're only going to have a headache, once a week or once every 2 weeks, right? Or once a month. So, so our focus again is how can we get you to live your life in a way where migraine doesn't kind of keep getting you to trip up and fall. And eventually you can kind of train your brain to be a version of yourself that you enjoy more, that you feel more free, right? And so even headaches, or even in the face of headaches, you still want to train your brain, kind of get stronger in a sense. Like, a lot of people when they have back issues, so Sequoia probably remembers me when I had my back issue. I learned a lot from that. And a lot of people try to avoid doing things that aggravates it, but really the ultimate cure is just to make you stronger so that it's not even an issue anymore. So I'm going to show you what I mean. Give me a sec. So first step is to understand a little bit about what you're dealing with, right? And how do I go about making myself stronger? So I'm going to use migraine here as an example, and that's what Darlene was asking about. If you look at migraine headaches, one thing to realize is the actual time when your head hurts is not the only part of the headache. The headache actually begins before your head actually hurts, and it ends after your head actually hurts. So before your head starts hurting, there's usually some subtle tells: yawning, food craving. Sometimes people have they eat chocolate because they have a craving for it. And then they say, oh, because I had chocolate, now I have a headache. I'm weak. I deserve this headache. I just got to swallow it because I caused it in myself. Not only are they probably wrong, it's probably just a food craving. They were already kind of headed towards a headache, but they're also making it worse by criticizing themselves for it, right? And that's a common thing in people with chronic headaches and chronic illnesses. they start to feel helpless and they start to criticize themselves, even if it makes no sense. We've seen it so many times. Very capable and competent people, they just start blaming themselves. You should be able to do this. Well, why do you say that? They have no reason. They can't back it up. They just, their heart just feels that way. So you can see a lot of psychology about that. And usually the best, when it's that entrenched, the best way to show them that they can is to set up experiments that see them successful. And then if they're like, oh, I succeeded at that, then you do a little bit more, you do a little bit more, and they get a little more intricate, a little bit more elaborate. And before you know it, they're starting to string together combos, right? And then they're starting to do more and more. And then all of a sudden, they have there's a lot more they can do rather than just lay there helpless. Some of those analogies I'm giving, I just started jujitsu recently. And I think about this a lot because sometimes you feel helpless, but there's so many things you can do. You just have to think about it and so on. So the premonitory phase, they've actually like measured it using functional MRI, using different types of images, measuring neurotransmitter levels. It's in a certain part of the brain. And, common symptoms are like irritability, depression, fatigue, hunger, appetite changes, sleep changes. And those are very non-specific, meaning like almost anything can cause those things, right? So it's really hard to like be like, oh, that's a headache coming. You could be like, oh, I didn't sleep well the night before. Maybe, maybe like what my mom said last night really got to me. Okay, you don't think about it like that. So part of the model of trying to understand and train yourself so that headache doesn't threaten your freedom so much is to get data and start to notice some of these cycles. So that's one thing about headaches. And this is also relevant to many other symptoms post-concussion, by the way. Like you take dizziness, some people, and actually the number one cause of dizziness in the world is actually migraine headache. So there is a lot of overlap and a lot of similarity between migraines and post-concussion symptoms in general. So, okay. So now that we said, okay, there's a whole evolution to how migraine headaches develop, right? So what are we actually dealing with when it comes to a migraine? And when we're dealing with, well, when you ask people to describe their headaches, one thing I think we can all admit is that we won't be able to understand them entirely. Like it's their own experience, right? You'll never be able to understand how someone's experiencing it. You think you might, oh, they can't do this, they can't do that, they must feel bad. But at some level, you're trying to understand their problem with your own values or your own prejudices and so on, right? So one of the things about neuroscience is they try to get past that interpretation part, and we're trying to see, well, what is the data, what's objective about it? And so they were able to break down the pain experience. So the way people experience pain, they're able to break it down and in a way that relates to everyone. They were able to notice that there's the part of your brain that lights up when you experience pain is called the pain matrix. And you can and there's different structures that are members of this pain matrix, and you can categorize these structures according to like the kind of teams they sit on. So like some structures of the brain are more involved with like thinking and cognitive tasks, right? So we'll call them cognitive members of that pain matrix. Some are more focused on emotional and affect, right? Emotional things. These are all part of the pain experience. So when someone actually hates their headache, I hate this headache, I hate it, I hate my life, and so on, they're actually increasing the volume on that headache. Not to blame them, because it makes sense why they would do it. And if it was just a one-off, they will get away with it. You could abuse yourself and tell yourself off and hate the headache all you want. And if it doesn't come back for 3 months, then who cares, right? You got away with it, right? It's not really an issue it's probably not a priority to deal with that. However, if it's a chronic thing, those are all opportunities for improvement. So teaching people that while it's reasonable to hate the headache, that part of the brain is part of the brain that experiences. So you're actually feeding it and experiencing that pain. Same thing with cognitive. Once you start thinking, okay, if I get a headache now, then I won't be able to do this and do that. So I better do this quickly before that happens, because last time this happened, I wasn't able to do that. And all those kind of like appraisals and evaluations, like giving too much respect to the headache, those cognitive circuits start to get involved. The part that we tend to call physical pain, the sensory discriminative, like, you know, when someone gives you a pinprick on your skin and that you can tell it's coming from your finger, right? That's the part of there's a part of the brain that interprets that. It's not your finger that interprets that. That's what we tend to call physical pain. But really the pain experience, look at it. It's all that orange on that brain map, right? So tell me which part of that orange is physical. And this is why a lot of psychological techniques and lifestyle techniques work very well for headaches, because they're focused on training your brain to be in a way that doesn't see it light up so much orange. So most people, when you're dealing with people with chronic headaches, many times people tend to react to their headaches in the same way over and over again. I can think of one example that the person I was talking about who had their injury 30 years ago. So he had chronic headaches, and literally he kept doing the same thing over and over. He'd get a headache, he'd take a nap, get a headache, take a nap, right? And then there was a lot of education we gave him about how like that might work against him through different mechanisms. So he didn't know what to do, but so he did an experiment. He's like, I'm just going to do something. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do whatever else there is, right? And this experiment went well for him. So I remember one time he was just sitting there and he was about to go for his nap, and we'd already kind of made contingency management plans and so on. So he just grabbed the basketball. He goes, I'm not doing that. I'm just going to grab a basketball and I'm just going to walk outside. No intention to play basketball. He'll figure it out when he gets there. He just was going to do something different, right? Break that cycle. I think he got lucky on this one, frankly, because he didn't even go with the plan we went. But after that, he started to realize, he got hope, and he started to realize there's something to it. And we started to make contingency management plans. And within 6 weeks, we were able to route out his headaches, although that wasn't our goal. Our goal is to make him live his life on his own terms with freedom, and the headaches kind of fell by the wayside. And we have it documented nicely in the way we're kind of tracking everything. Anyway, so he went out. This is just a nice story. He went out, and then he was out there with a basketball, and then there was a kid out there. Right, he was right next to the basketball court, and the kid's like, "Hey, sir, you want to come play with us?" He's like, "Okay." So he went to play with them, and then he played a game. He played 2 games. He's really athletic, so he did really well. And then the third game, he was like, "You know what? I'm gonna do it differently. I'm not gonna be so competitive. I'm just going to like enjoy playing with this high school kid." And so he enjoyed. He even said he let the kid beat him because he just was joking around and playing with him. And afterwards, they had a talk, and they were talking about school. You know, this kid's 25 years younger, talking about school and what things are like and differences in culture and things like that. He totally forgot about the headache. Not that you can forget about it, but I'm just saying as an example, like it was genuine, right? And then so we start to be more intentional about how we kind of set up these plays to root out the headache. That's how that therapy works. Whereas if you keep doing the same thing over and over, you're basically like practicing the same move over and over. Whether you like it or not, you don't want to do that, but it's kind of like a muscle memory thing, right? That's how these headaches work. So you're not really like damaging yourself, but you're just getting better at having headaches the more often you have them. That's called sensitization. And I know getting better at having them makes it sound like you're partly to blame. I don't want to give off that impression, but I just want to kind of make it dramatic, like in the sense that you understand that there's a lot you can do about it. Yeah, so just like that, doing something differently, you can train that too, right? And that's one of the beautiful things about the brain. Although it seems like we have very little control over our symptoms, we do have a lot of control over the next steps we take, and those next steps can take us one step closer to the version of ourselves we want to see again. So the last thing Darlene was asking about, I'm probably out of time now, but Darlene was asking about was dementia. I don't know the exact stats. I was at a conference recently by the University Health Network, who they have one of like the top concussion programs probably in the world. So they do a lot of research, and they were able to show that there is a real elevated risk of dementia after a concussion. Now, having an elevated risk doesn't mean you're going to go on to develop it. And there's so many other factors involved in a persistent concussion case, right? I'm always reluctant to throw stats like that at people because it might not be you. And, you know, when we're studying people, the concussion people, there's a lot of differences from one person to the next. There's a lot of differences. So at the same time, you know, the whole point of the study is to kind of highlight that it is a real, it's not a mild injury. It's actually a severe injury. A lot of times people think of concussion and mild traumatic brain injury to mean the same thing. But in this sense, it's not really mild, right? Like your risk of having dementia might go up after this. You do have a higher risk. The other thing is a lot of people are not aware, but people who have concussions have a higher incidence of headaches post-concussion than people who have more severe traumatic brain injuries, right? So the word mild can kind of mislead people. One thing I mentioned earlier on about the emergency department that I think was Renee was talking about is also in the literature, about 75% of people don't go on to develop persistent concussion syndrome. So a lot of those people will get better too. So the emergency department, you know, they're just seeing them right off the bat. But a lot of those people are going to get better. So this is probably another reason why emergency departments don't really focus on that too much. So many reasons. It's not the right place for post-concussion syndrome rehabilitation. They're really just making sure that you're going to make it through the night type thing. Okay, so yeah, that was just an aside. So I'm going to go back. Where was I? Oh, yeah, dementia. We have some patients. Sometimes I'm working with them, and I actually do believe that they're going to have a higher incidence of dementia. Like I think some of the people are going to be more destined to it, and destined for it. And there is some interventions you can do, some brain imaging. There is some controversy surrounding it, but like there's certain types of EEGs you can do and so on that can help you see people's how their brain is functioning. And some patients post-concussion, their brain looks a lot more like a brain, like a brain with dementia. Processing speed goes way down, and the way the brain lights up, and so on. Again, you look at a person, you won't see that. Sometimes you'll see irritability, them flying off the handle, and like, wow, you need a psychiatrist or something. But people don't see what's actually going on in the brain. They're like the biggest victim. We think we're a victim of putting up with like their tantrums, but they're the biggest victim of the problem, right? And I know like that author I was mentioning, Gabor Mate, right? Dr. Gabor Mate. He was talking about it, like a lot of times children with behavioral issues. A lot of times they're the victims because they've dealt with trauma or other types of things. And if we can look at them and instead of seeing them as troubled children and just like we don't want to deal with their issue, if we can look at them and say, how can we help this person to take the next step to help them advance their development? What's the next step we can take to make them a better version of themselves? We could probably go a long way. So it's very similar, you know, and when it comes to this type of rehabilitation, we're really looking at what's the next step we can take to make you a better version of yourself. Many different types of neurological rehabilitation really does well with that. Even I was taking a course a couple of years ago, and I forget the doctor's name, but he's very well known in Canada. And he was giving us a talk about addictions, and that's their approach too. He was talking very much like that, in their approach in helping people, rather than trying to find out where it started and who's to blame, really focusing on the next step and what can we do to get a better version of yourself and so on. Anyway, so I know there wasn't really much more to say about the dementia thing. I don't want you guys to I never really want patients to kind of focus on that because there's so many things that you could do to kind of get your brain working in a better way. And I think that at a general level, when people say that you have a higher risk of dementia, it's basically a reflection also of like the care of these injuries right now, right? Because if you just take them all these factors all together, this is what's coming out at the end, that you do have a higher risk of dementia. But if you look at all those people, there could be a lot of differences between them. Obviously in studies they try to control for that, but there's a lot of things we don't know right now about, you know, we don't even know it's a thing or something like that. So how do you control for something that you don't even recognize yet? Anyways, they're doing a lot more studies because it's a very it's a field that seems to have like an ocean with no bottom type thing.
Well, I guess I'll just jump in here and I'll say like it's been a great talk, very interesting. I had a injury, head injury as a young child, which was a long, long time ago, and I often wonder, if it's still affecting me. So it just brings up those questions for me again, and I'll continue to think about everything you've spoken about. And do you have any webinars or anything on your website that people could maybe check out if they want to look further?
We have a podcast right on our website, and we also have a lot of articles, and a lot of the videos we have are really kind of geared towards helping people, supporting them with their rehabilitation. So they're very kind of specialized, like showing them how to do certain exercise, so in case they forget or they need a reminder and that kind of stuff. But if you go look through there and look at like the rehab resources, and you start to like peruse it, you'll get an idea of how broad the scope is of this injury, and how many things that we can actually address in the training regimen, depending on the patient and what they want to see and so on. And yeah.
Well, that's wonderful.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.
great.
I just want to check in with Darlene. Did that answer a lot of your questions, Darlene?
Yes, it did. I have just one thought that went through my mind. I love the way you talked about your daughter growing up, because lately I've been thinking about, we grow up, our brain is moving along, but as we age, and the aging brain really interests me. And I think of it as our brain growing down in that focusing on one particular item to get through that item that we're doing, and then just move on and focus on another thing. And it eventually gets done. It just doesn't get done as quickly as the brain growing up does. But that's okay. I get it done.
Yeah, take for example drivers. So we pretty much know like the worst drivers out there generally, I don't want to like point fingers, tend to be like the very old, like 80 and above, and the very young, like 16 and 17, right? And however, the 80-year-olds, they tend to be very conservative in the routes they take. They drive at certain times, they take back roads, and they try to avoid left turns. They'll do that kind of stuff, right? They won't pass people in the lane, and pass people and so on. Whereas younger people, they don't do any of that stuff, but they have really quick reflexes, where the older people don't, right? And so like that, really focusing, we can really kind of focus on our strengths and leverage those to kind of get better versions of ourselves. But if we're kind of too obsessed with the results, we're not even slowing down to notice those opportunities. You take, for example, like the jujitsu I was talking about that I'm doing. I'm doing it with my brother, and he gets so into it and so revved up, and he just like tries to overpower everyone, and he gets carried away. He doesn't even realize there's an easier way to do something. If you were just to settle down and relax and be a little less type A, he could see he could do it effortlessly without using all those muscles, right? So I think that's a big part of aging, is to, or not just aging, any phase of your life. How do you know the formula that you're using to do whatever you're doing is the best formula? It might have been yesterday or a week ago or 2 weeks ago, but there might be a better one now. And this is one of the reasons why mindfulness has become so popular, and even you take NFL clubs, they have mindfulness coaches, right? Because they're starting to realize that if you can make the brain stronger, then the brain will do almost everything better. But anyways, just something that in response to what you said.
And would you say that also just like shaking things up sometimes and just doing something completely differently, like outside of the box, like just to try something new, right? And see, instead of getting stuck in like a habit of how you do things or how you react to things.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's hard to generalize like that. Like, it definitely could be a good thing, but it could also be a bad thing depending on the context, right? Those type of things usually, like, the team will help people with and decide, and it might be a good thing. Usually it's the patient that knows best, but as you run them through the process, they can feel more confident about their decision. But there could be a lot, I think, rather than like doing a new thing or shaking things up, I think having a new perspective on it. There's this, actually, you know what? I'll leave off with saying this one thing. There's this movie called About Time. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's a good movie. It's an English movie, like a romantic comedy. It has one of our Canadian actresses in it, Rachel McAdams. It's on Netflix. And there's a scene at the end. So this family, they have a power where they can go back in time and relive everything and redo things again, right? And there's a scene at the end where the prototype, he kind of does things a certain way, right? And then he does the exact same thing, but with a different outlook, a different perspective, a different mindset. And I think that movie does a really good job of showing that it's not so much what you do. Now, sometimes doing something new makes it a lot easier to also like not carry forward a culture that's holding you back. You know what I mean? So it can be like you can get lucky. Like it might be a very quick shortcut to kind of doing that. But anyways, if you want to check out that movie, it's a fun movie. And also that last scene, you'll see what I'm talking about. I think it's more about that. And when people can kind of get there, they can basically do anything and experience it differently.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Dr. Chugh. I really appreciate your time.
No
Thanks
problem.
everyone
No
for
problem.
being
Take
here
care,
tonight.
everyone. Okay.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you. It was great.
All right. I'm happy you guys enjoyed it and it was worth your hour and 12 minutes.